Captain Alina Morrow stood in the dimly lit command center of the Eclipse, the ship humming as it sliced through the cold expanse of space. The only sound was the occasional ping of the ship's sensors as they scanned the uncharted region of the galaxy. A newly established, small sector at the edge of the human expansion had been marked for exploration. But today was different. Today, something had caught their attention. "Captain, you need to see this," Lieutenant Daniels called from his console. His voice was tight with urgency. Alina turned, crossing the room to stand beside him. On the screen before him, a flickering series of symbols repeated in a pattern that was far too deliberate to be random. "It's a distress signal," Daniel said, his fingers flying over the console as he decoded the message. "But it's not from any known species. This isn't a message anyone in the Alliance would send. It's older, scrambled, and the frequency is off the chart low." Alina frowned, her instincts telling her that this was important. Humanity had only recently earned the right to speak at the Galactic table, but in many circles, they were still seen as a species to be ignored. Just a few decades ago, Earth was nothing more than a small, somewhat curious player in the galaxy's sprawling empire. But now, as a member of the United Earth Coalition, their influence was starting to grow. Yet there was still the undeniable truth. The cosmos had long neglected humanity. Most species considered them too young, too insignificant, and too disorganized. But the humans on the Eclipse weren't the sort to sit idle and wait for opportunities. Alina's crew had a reputation for taking risks, for finding solutions when others turned away. "What's the source?" Alina asked, her voice firm. The ship's eye, a soft and familiar voice named Eos, chimed in. "The signal originates from the Valoris system, approximately 40,000 light-years away. It's a planet within a largely unexplored sector of space. Why hasn't anyone responded?" Alina asked, staring at the unreadable symbols on the screen. The message was unlike anything they'd encountered. Foreign, alien, yet somehow pleading. "It could be that no one has dared venture this far," Captain Daniel said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes wide with curiosity. "There are rumors of a dangerous galactic anomaly near that system, one that few explorers dare approach." Alina's mind raced. The risk was high, but the allure of the unknown was even higher. She turned to her second-in-command, Commander Ryan Ellis, who had been quietly listening from the back of the room. His face was unreadable, but she could tell he was already calculating the risks in his head. "Ryan, what do you think?" she asked, locking eyes with him. Ellis didn't hesitate. "We go," he said simply. "It's a signal of distress. If someone is in trouble, we can't just ignore it. The rest of the galaxy might, but we shouldn't. Not when we've got the chance to make a difference." Alina gave a small nod. She trusted Ryan's instincts. They were always dead on. She turned back to Daniels, who was now typing furiously on his console. "Prepare the ship for immediate departure," she ordered, feeling a strange pull in her gut. "We'll need to be ready for anything. This could be dangerous." As the Eclipse shifted into position for warp speed, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would define them, perhaps not just as explorers, but as something more. A chance to prove that humanity was more than the sum of its parts, more than just another inconsequential species in the cosmos. The ship's engines thrummed to life, and in the silence that followed, Alina stared out at the starry void. It was easy to feel small in the face of the galaxy's vastness, to feel as if humanity was merely a whisper in the grand expanse. But something about this mission, this signal, told her that they had just stumbled upon something much larger than they had anticipated. In that moment, she made a promise to herself, to her crew, that no matter what they found on Valoris, they would not turn back. The galaxy had forgotten species like the Aurelians, but humanity wouldn't. They would be the ones to answer the call. And that was only the beginning. The Eclipse dropped out of warp at the edge of the Valoris system, the stars now a blur as the ship cruised toward the planet. Captain Alina Morrow stood at the helm, watching the planet grow larger on the view screen. Valorous was a beautiful sight. Blue oceans swirling beneath vast green continents, towering mountains piercing the sky, and lush forests stretching across the horizon. From a distance, it looked peaceful, untouched by time or conflict. But Alina knew better. Approaching the planet, Lieutenant Daniels reported, breaking the silence. His voice was low, strained, like he knew they were walking into something far bigger than they had anticipated. Alina leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. EOS, scan for any signs of life or unusual activity. The ship's AI hummed briefly before responding. No major atmospheric disturbances detected. However, there are signs of abnormal electromagnetic interference near the planet's northern continent. It is likely a signal disruption caused by large-scale energy activity. Anything from the surface? Alina asked, her gaze narrowing. Negative, Captain. No active communications detected. Alina's fingers tightened around the armrest. They had expected something, but nothing prepared them for the eerie silence. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Set us down near the disruption point, she ordered. We'll investigate firsthand. As the eclipse descended through the atmosphere, the crew looked out at the barren land below. There were no signs of civilization, no cities, no roads, just untamed wilderness. It was as though the planet had been abandoned long ago, left to rot in the cosmic cold. The Aurelian's desperate message seemed more haunting now, echoing in Alina's mind. When they touched down on the ground, the ship's landing gear sunk into soft earth. Outside, the view was even more unsettling. Towering trees with bioluminescent markings spread across the landscape, casting long shadows that flickered like ghosts in the fading light of the twin moons above. The air smelled fresh, but there was an underlying sense of abandonment, a loneliness that seemed to settle over everything. All right, team, Alina said, standing up from her seat and turning to her crew. Keep your weapons ready. We don't know what we'll find here. Commander Ryan Ellis, as always, was quick to comply. He glanced over at the rest of the team. Lieutenant Daniels, the tech specialist, Dr. Sarah Leung, their xenobiologist, and Ensign Jack Harper, their rookie navigator, each of them geared up for whatever awaited them. The airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped into the alien world. The ground beneath their boots felt firm, but the atmosphere held an odd tension. It was too quiet, too still. Even the wildlife, if there was any, was absent. Alina took a deep breath. Let's move out. Stick together. They trekked through the dense forest, the bioluminescent trees casting faint glows over their path. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, they noticed signs of life. Fragments of technology, old and decaying, half buried under the thick foliage. Some of it resembled ancient communication devices, others seemed to be parts of machinery long unused. These look like remnants of a civilization, Dr. Leung remarked, crouching next to a partially disassembled structure. But why is it so abandoned? No signs of anyone having used this in years. Alina's stomach tightened. The Aurelians had once been a thriving species, advanced, intelligent, and peaceful. Yet here they were, seemingly forgotten, their world now reduced to ruins. A creeping suspicion formed in Alina's mind. We need to find the Aurelians, she said quietly, and we need to find them fast. The further they ventured, the more it became clear the planet had suffered. What once was a civilization of great promise had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but scattered remnants of a lost species. The Aurelians had disappeared, or worse, been wiped out. Captain, look at this, Daniels called from up ahead. He was standing in front of a crumbling stone archway, covered in moss and vines. The symbols on the arch were faint but undeniably Aurelian. Alina approached, her heart pounding. The Aurelians had left their mark on this world long ago, but now their presence was little more than a memory. The signs of their civilization were unmistakable. Let's go inside, Alina said, her voice a mixture of resolve and worry. Maybe we'll find something that can explain what happened here. As they moved through the archway, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier. It felt like the very planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. They passed through the ruins of what had once been a magnificent city, now nothing more than rubble and shadows. And yet, despite everything, despite the eerie silence and the haunting remnants of the Aurelians' past, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath the rubble or lost in the wilderness, the Aurelians were still alive. And if Alina had anything to say about it, they wouldn't be forgotten for much longer. The air was thick with tension as Captain Alina Morrow and her crew pushed deeper into the heart of the abandoned Aurelian city. The ruins were a haunting testament to the once thriving civilization that had called this planet home. Vines crept up the remnants of elegant buildings, and shattered walls stood like broken sentinels. Every step they took seemed to echo, amplifying the eerie silence around them. "Anything on the scanners, EOs?" Alina asked, trying to break the silence that had settled over the team. "Negative, Captain," came the eye's reply. "No unusual readings from the surface, but I am detecting irregularities in the electromagnetic spectrum. It may be a result of atmospheric interference, but it's unlike anything I've encountered." Alina's gaze hardened. The planet was unnervingly quiet. No sign of life. No movement. It felt like they were walking through a graveyard, and the eerie stillness weighed heavily on her. "Keep your eyes open," she instructed, her voice steady. "We're not alone here. I can feel it." Suddenly, a sharp crack rang out through the air, like the sound of distant thunder. The crew froze, weapons instinctively drawn. Alina's heart skipped a beat. The noise wasn't natural. Something had changed. Something was moving toward them. "Move. Now." Alina barked. Without another word, the crew sprinted toward the cover of a nearby building, ducking into the shadow of what appeared to be an ancient structure, its walls still lined with glowing symbols that hummed faintly in the dark. They waited, listening. The only sounds were their ragged breaths, the rustling of distant leaves, and the low hum of their equipment. And then, through the trees, the first of them appeared. A massive figure stepped into view, its silhouette jagged against the dim light. The Zorn. Alina's stomach tightened. The Zorn were known for their ruthless tactics and merciless ways. They were one of the most feared empires in the galaxy, infamous for their unrelenting conquest and enslaving of weaker species. Their soldiers, tall and armored, bore intimidating black exoskeletons that hummed with energy, their red optics glowing ominously. "Zorn," Commander Ryan Ellis muttered under his breath, his knuckles white around his weapon. The Zorn soldier was followed by another, and then another, until a small unit of them emerged from the trees. They moved with military precision, scanning the area with their advanced tech. It was clear they had been searching for something. Someone, on this planet, and the crew's presence hadn't gone unnoticed. "What do we do?" Dr. Lum whispered, her voice shaky. "Stay low, stay quiet," Alina ordered. She could feel her pulse quickening. They couldn't afford to be seen. If they were discovered, there was no way they could fight their way out. Not without reinforcements. Not with the Zorn's overwhelming firepower. As the Zorn soldiers advanced, Alina's eyes darted to a narrow gap between the ruins. If they could make it there undetected, they might be able to regroup and formulate a plan. "On my mark," Alina whispered, her voice barely audible. Just as the last Zorn soldier stepped past them, Alina gave the signal. "Now." The crew sprinted in the opposite direction, weaving through the ruins with practiced agility. Their hearts pounded in their chests, each step feeling like an eternity. The Zorn soldiers didn't seem to notice them, too focused on their search. But Alina knew it was only a matter of time before they caught on. As they ducked behind a collapsed structure, Alina's thoughts raced. They hadn't come this far to fail. They had to protect the Aurelians, and if the Zorn were here, it meant the Aurelians were in imminent danger. This wasn't just a recon mission anymore. It was a rescue operation. "We have to find them," Alina muttered under her breath. We have to find the Aurelians before the Zorn do. Lieutenant Daniels tapped his communicator, his face growing pale. Captain, I've been able to tap into the Zorn's comms. They're planning something. Something big. They're calling for reinforcements from their fleet. They're going to attack. Alina's pulse quickened. The large-scale assault was coming. She didn't know how long the Aurelians could hold out, but the Zorn wouldn't stop until they'd wiped out or enslaved every last one of them. She had to act quickly. We need to warn them, Alina said, her voice hardening with resolve. We can't let them get wiped out without a fight. The Zorn were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they controlled Valoris. But Alina wasn't about to let them win without a fight. Humanity wasn't here to be passive observers. They were here to change the tide. We'll need to move fast, Ryan said, his voice steady. The Aurelians might still be hiding, but we have no time to waste. The team moved out, staying in the shadows, their senses heightened. Alina's mind raced as she formulated their next steps. They had to find the Aurelians. They had to warn them and prepare them. If the humans and Aurelians were going to survive this, they'd need to work together. But time was running out. The Zorn threat loomed over Valoris like a dark cloud, but Alina Morrow refused to let it suffocate them. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. The human crew of the Eclipse now had one mission above all else: prepare the Aurelians to defend their home. They had found them, hidden deep in the ruins of their fallen cities. The Aurelians, once a proud and peaceful species, were now fractured and scattered, the remnants of their once great civilization barely clinging to life. Their tall, slender bodies were still elegant, but their eyes carried the weight of centuries of suffering. Upon discovering the survivors, Alina's crew had carefully integrated with them, offering aid, food, and medical supplies. But now, the time for diplomacy had ended. The Zorn were closing in, and the Aurelians needed to fight back. You understand this is our only chance, Alina said, her voice firm but compassionate, as she addressed the Aurelian Council. The alien leaders sat before her, their long, silvery limbs folded gracefully across their laps. They were a peaceful species, unaccustomed to violence, and the thought of taking up arms seemed foreign to them. Yet Alina could see the spark of determination in their eyes, a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. Let us not abandon our world to these invaders, one of the counselors, a tall Aurelian named Nira, said quietly. Her voice was steady, but Alina could hear the fear beneath it. We are not warriors. We have always believed in peace. How can we fight? Alina didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to Commander Ryan Ellis, who stood beside her. His expression was serious, his usual confidence tempered by the gravity of their mission. Training the Aurelians won't be easy, Ryan said, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. But if they don't learn how to defend themselves, the Zorn will wipe them out. The key is to teach them how to use their strengths, whatever they may be, and adapt quickly. We don't need an army. We need a resistance. Captain Morrow nodded. Exactly. We can't afford to overwhelm them with too much, too quickly. We'll start with the basics: survival tactics, stealth, and the use of their environment. The Zorn are ruthless, but they're not invincible. If we teach the Aurelians to fight smart, we might stand a chance. The Aurelians were hesitant, but the urgency in Alina's voice carried weight. After a long moment, Nira stood, nodding. We will do whatever is necessary to protect our people. And with that, the first lesson began. Over the next few days, the human crew set up a rudimentary training camp in the heart of the ruined city, using the abandoned structures as cover and obstacles. They taught the Aurelians basic military tactics, how to move in formation, how to handle weapons, and most importantly, how to remain silent and invisible when the enemy was near. Lieutenant Daniels was the first to step up, instructing the Aurelians on camouflage and survival skills. He showed them how to use the natural terrain, thick trees, tall grasses, and craggy rocks, to hide and move undetected. The Aurelians had an inherent connection to the land, their long, slender limbs making them adept at blending into their surroundings. Daniels marveled at how quickly they adapted, their instincts sharp despite their inexperience with combat. Meanwhile, Dr. Lung, the xenobiologist, worked with the Aurelians on understanding their biology. She demonstrated how their heightened senses could be used to their advantage. Their large, multifaceted eyes could see across a broader spectrum of light than humans could, giving them an advantage in low-light conditions. Their heightened sense of hearing and smell would allow them to detect the Zorn long before they were spotted. It was a natural ability that would be crucial in the coming battle. Ryan Ellis and Elena focused on weapon training, teaching the Aurelians how to handle human-made weapons, specifically energy rifles and basic explosives. The Aurelians were naturally strong, but their lack of combat experience made them wary of the weapons. Ryan, with his calm demeanor, reassured them that it was not the weapon that mattered, but the resolve behind it. "I know it feels unnatural," Ryan said as he showed an Aurelian named Vera how to properly aim a rifle. "But if you're going to survive, you need to understand that the weapon is a tool. It's not about violence. It's about survival." Vera nodded, gripping the weapon with an intensity Elena hadn't seen before. It wasn't the unshakable resolve of a seasoned soldier, but it was something. It was hope. The days passed, and with each passing hour, the Aurelians grew more confident, more capable. It wasn't just the training that had changed them. It was the shift in their minds. For the first time in years, they were beginning to see themselves not as victims, but as fighters. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Elena sat alone, watching the Aurelian trainees in the distance. They were practicing their stealth tactics, moving through the ruins with fluid precision. It wasn't perfect. There were still missteps, moments of hesitation. But they were getting there. Ryan approached her, his face set in grim determination. "How are they doing?" "They're learning," Elena said, her voice soft but firm. "They're learning to fight for their home. But we're running out of time. The Zorn will be here soon. We need to be ready." Ryan nodded, glancing out at the growing camp of Aurelian fighters. "We'll make sure they're ready. We don't stop until they are." Elena looked out over the camp, a sense of resolve settling over her. They had no other choice. The Aurelians were their allies now, and humanity was going to stand beside them, no matter what it took. The fight was about to begin, and Elena wasn't about to let the Zorn destroy this world without a fight. The night was unnaturally quiet as Captain Elena Morrow and her crew prepared for the inevitable. The Aurelian resistance was still young, and their training had only scratched the surface of what was needed to fend off a full-scale Zorn invasion. But the Zorn weren't going to wait much longer. Their reinforcements were en route, and with them came an overwhelming military might. Elena sat with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, staring at the tactical map of the planet that Lieutenant Daniels had projected. The planet's northern hemisphere had gone dark on all scans. The Zorn were drawing closer, and their army would be massive, brimming with the terror they were famous for. "We don't have much time," Daniels said, breaking the silence. His fingers hovered over the controls, zooming in on the map. "We've detected heavy movement on the Zorn fleet's approach. They've established a perimeter around the planet. We can't outrun them, and we sure as hell can't avoid them." Elena's jaw tightened. "We've trained them, and they've adapted quickly. But the odds are still stacked against us." Commander Ryan Ellis, standing beside her, watched the map with a sharp eye. "It's not about the odds, Captain. It's about strategy. We've got the terrain. We know the land better than they do. We just need to keep them off balance, make them overestimate our strength. The Zorn are ruthless, but they're also predictable." Elena nodded. Ryan was right. It wasn't a fair fight, not by any stretch of the imagination. But it didn't matter. The Zorn had underestimated humanity before. They'd made the same mistake with the Aurelians. Now, the crew of the Eclipse had one goal: to make sure that this time, the Zorn wouldn't get away with it. "Tonight," Elena said, her voice steady but laced with determination. "We're going to hit them first. We'll use the cover of the forest. We'll hit their supply line and disrupt their comms. The Aurelians are ready. It's time to show the Zorn they're not getting an easy victory." As the crew began to finalize their plans, a low rumble sounded in the distance. The Zorn had arrived. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. "They're here," Dr. Lung said, her eyes wide. "We need to move now." Elena nodded. "Let's move out, people. Stick to the plan, and keep your wits about you." The first skirmish was nothing like the Aurelians had ever imagined. Armed with human-made weapons and trained in survival tactics, they moved quickly through the dense forest, using the natural terrain to their advantage. The bioluminescent trees provided cover, casting long shadows that allowed them to slip undetected toward the Zorn encampment. At the front of the group, Elena and Ryan led the charge, their eyes scanning every movement. The Aurelians followed closely behind, their graceful bodies now suited for the quick, silent movements required in warfare. Vyra, the Aurelian they had trained, now moved with the confidence of a soldier, her rifle held steady in her hands. The Zorn camp was surrounded by defensive turrets, the towering soldiers pacing back and forth in their black exoskeletons. Their alien tech hummed with energy, but it was the human ingenuity of the Aurelian resistance that gave Elena hope. "On my mark," Elena whispered into her communicator. "Daniels, Harper, disable their communications array. The rest of us, we move in and neutralize their perimeter." A chorus of acknowledgments came back through the comms, and Elena held her breath. The fate of Valoris was now in their hands. "Now," Elena shouted. The forest erupted in action. Daniels and Harper were the first to reach the Zorn's communication array, planting explosives with practiced precision. The quiet hiss of the detonators went unnoticed by the Zorn, their attention focused elsewhere. The pair darted back into the cover of the trees as the charges went off in a brilliant flash, sending a shockwave through the camp. The Zorn scrambled, disoriented by the blast and the sudden loss of their comms. It was the opening the humans and Aurelians had been waiting for. The Aurelian resistance surged forward, silent and deadly. Ryan and Elena led the charge, moving through the chaos like shadows. Their rifles barked with deadly force, taking down a few Zorn soldiers before they had a chance to retaliate. The Aurelians, with their newfound training, used their agility and stealth to outmaneuver the enemy, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing into the foliage as quickly as they appeared. But the Zorn weren't helpless. They quickly regrouped, their armor and advanced weaponry giving them a formidable edge. One of the Aurelians fell, caught by a Zorn soldier's energy blast. The others hesitated, fear creeping into their hearts as the realization that the battle was far from over settled in. "Keep going," Elena shouted, rallying the Aurelians. "We have the element of surprise. Don't stop now." Her words seemed to reignite their courage. Vyra, with fire in her eyes, took the lead, charging toward a group of Zorn soldiers who had taken cover behind a large rock formation. Her rifle fired with pinpoint accuracy, dropping 2 Zorn before they could even react. The skirmish raged on, a chaotic dance of light and shadows as the Aurelians, fueled by their newfound resolve, fought alongside their human allies. The Zorn were powerful, but they were not invincible. They had underestimated humanity before, and this time it would cost them. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. The Zorn were relentless, and they would strike back. The Eclipse crew had won the first battle, but the war for Valoris had only just begun. The night air was thick with the scent of smoke and the sound of distant explosions. The clash between the Aurelians and the Zorn had transformed the once peaceful wilderness into a battlefield. Captain Elena Morrow stood at the front of the resistance, her heart racing as she surveyed the chaos around her. They had hit the Zorn hard, but it was far from a decisive victory. The Zorn were regrouping, and their retaliation was swift. "Captain, we've lost contact with Daniels and Harper," Lieutenant Ryan Ellis reported, his voice strained through the comms. Their last transmission indicated they were pinned down near the western ridge. We need to move fast or risk losing them. Alina's jaw clenched, but she didn't hesitate. Gather the team. We're going after them. The Aurelians had proven themselves, brave and agile. Their newfound skills had helped turn the tide in the skirmish. But they weren't prepared for a full-scale Zorn assault. Alina knew the Resistance's window of opportunity was closing fast. They had to keep up the pressure, but they also had to protect their own. As the team moved toward the western ridge, Alina's mind raced. The Zorn were a juggernaut of military might, well-armored, heavily armed, and ruthless in their pursuit of conquest. The Aurelians had no hope of standing up to them in a straight fight. It wasn't just the weapons or the numbers, it was the strategy. The Zorn were masters of war, their tactics brutal and efficient. The Aurelians, on the other hand, had relied on peace and diplomacy for centuries. But now, that same adaptability that made them such a peaceful species could be their greatest asset. We need to divide them, Alina said, as she and her crew moved cautiously through the forest. The Zorn are too organized. We'll never win head-on. We have to break them into smaller groups, make them fight on our terms. Ryan nodded. Agreed. We can use the terrain to our advantage. The Zorn might have the numbers, but we know the land better. Their approach was slow and deliberate. The Aurelians had developed a new sense of purpose, each of them now moving with precision. Alina had been impressed by how quickly they had adapted. Vyra, who had once been unsure of herself, now moved with the calm confidence of a seasoned soldier, her rifle slung low but always at the ready. She had become a symbol of the Aurelian resilience, her determination infectious. We're getting close, Ryan muttered as they crouched behind a cluster of rocks. We should move fast before they regroup. We've got one shot at this. Alina gave a sharp nod, signaling the team to move out. They crept forward, each step calculated, each breath held. The western ridge loomed ahead, and the faintest glimmers of Zorn movement could be seen in the distance. The rescue mission was turning into a high-risk extraction, and the clock was ticking. As they neared the ridge, the team could see Daniels and Harper, pinned down behind a series of rocks by a small group of Zorn soldiers. The Zorn were armed with energy rifles, their black exoskeletons blending with the night, making them almost impossible to spot unless you were right on top of them. We'll have to be quick, Alina whispered. Daniels, Harper, hold tight, we're coming for you. The Aurelians, armed with their newly acquired skills and weapons, took up positions. Vera led the charge, flanking to the left, her swift movements almost a blur as she disappeared into the shadows. The others followed suit, each of them using the cover of the terrain to move unseen. Alina motioned for Ryan to move in from the right, a pincer attack designed to catch the Zorn off guard. The moment was right. Now, Alina shouted. Gunfire erupted, cutting through the night like thunder. Vera emerged from the shadows, rifle raised, and dropped one of the Zorn soldiers with a single shot. The rest of the team followed, their energy rifles cutting through the silence with deadly precision. The Zorn soldiers scrambled to return fire, but the Aurelians and humans moved faster, their surprise attack overwhelming the invaders. Daniels and Harper, who had been crouched low behind the rocks, popped up from their position, returning fire with support from the Aurelians. Together, they took down the remaining Zorn soldiers, leaving no one standing. Clear, Daniels shouted, panting, as he and Harper moved toward the group. We thought we were done for. Thanks for the rescue. Alina's gaze lingered on the wreckage around them. No time for thanks. We've got a bigger problem. The Zorn are getting organized, and their reinforcements will be here any minute. Ryan glanced at the horizon. The faint rumble of distant engines could be heard in the background. We don't have much time. Alina exhaled sharply. We need to fall back to the secondary base. It's the only place we can regroup and plan our next move. Let's move out. As the team made their way toward the secondary base, Alina's mind raced. They had won a small victory, but it had come at a cost. The Zorn would retaliate, and they'd come in force. But now, for the first time, Alina saw a spark of hope. The Aurelians weren't just survivors, they were becoming warriors, and that made all the difference. The battle for Valoris was far from over, but Alina knew one thing for certain. Humanity and the Aurelians were no longer fighting alone. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. The tide was beginning to turn. The night sky over Valoris had shifted. What had once been a quiet, peaceful world was now a battlefield. The Aurelians, bolstered by the training and tactics shared by Captain Alina Morrow and her human crew, had struck the Zorn a blow they hadn't expected. But it was only a matter of time before the full might of the Zorn's military descended upon them, and Alina knew that the small victories they had achieved would be quickly overshadowed by what was coming. The secondary base was nestled deep within the dense forest, hidden from prying eyes by ancient trees that had grown thick over centuries. It was the perfect location to regroup and plan their next move. As the team arrived, breathless and worn from the skirmishes, Alina couldn't shake the feeling of urgency that gnawed at her. "Get everything set up," Alina commanded. "We don't have long before the Zorn figure out where we're hiding." The Aurelians quickly got to work, setting up defenses and securing the perimeter. The human crew worked alongside them, their movements sharp and efficient. Daniels worked on reinforcing the base's security systems, while Dr. Leung and Ryan discussed the next steps. The Aurelians were more than capable of holding their ground, but the question was, for how long? "We're not going to hold them off forever," Ryan said, his face grim as he reviewed the satellite images. "The Zorn will come at us in waves. They'll throw everything they have at us. We need to hit them harder before they can organize and retaliate." Alina nodded, her thoughts racing. "I agree, but we can't do it alone. We need to draw their attention away from the base, force them into smaller engagements. We've got to strike at their core." As the team discussed strategy, the unmistakable hum of Zorn warships filled the air. The first wave had arrived. The Zorn had launched their counterattack with brutal efficiency. Their ships circled the planet, cutting off escape routes and deploying ground forces in vast waves. The Zorn were a highly disciplined and technologically advanced species, and now the full force of their military might had been brought to bear. Alina watched the skies, where streaks of fire from enemy ships lit up the horizon. "They're here," Ryan muttered, his voice low. "I know," Alina replied, her gaze steely. "And we're not going to let them walk all over us." The first wave of Zorn ground forces came charging through the forest, their black exoskeletons gleaming in the moonlight. They moved with terrifying precision, using their superior armor and advanced weaponry to cut through the trees with ease. The Aurelians and humans didn't wait for them to get any closer. They'd prepared for this moment. The moment the first Zorn soldier stepped into the clearing, Vera gave the signal. The Aurelian resistance opened fire, their energy rifles humming with deadly force. The Zorn soldiers fired back, but their bulky armor made them slower than their human and Aurelian counterparts. The resistance had learned to fight smart, targeting weak points in the Zorn armor and using the dense terrain to their advantage. Alina and Ryan coordinated the attack from a higher vantage point, providing direction to the Aurelians below. The Zorn forces were formidable, but they were scattered across a wide front. It was time to strike fast, to make them feel vulnerable. "Focus on the Zorn command unit," Alina instructed. "If we can take out their leadership, it will throw them into chaos." The Aurelians and humans moved with military precision, using hit-and-run tactics to confuse and disorient the Zorn. The resistance had a distinct advantage in mobility, and they capitalized on it. Every move was calculated. Strike fast, disappear into the trees, and strike again. Ryan Ellis looked over at Alina, who gave him a small nod. "Let's do this," she said. The first wave of Aurelians launched their diversion, moving swiftly through the trees to create chaos near the perimeter. Explosions lit up the sky, and the Zorn troops scrambled, trying to reorient themselves. That was their cue. Alina, Ryan, Daniels, and the other human crew members sprinted forward, using the cover of the distraction to close the gap between them and the flagship. The Zorn were disoriented, but it wouldn't last long. They had only a few minutes before the enemy regrouped. They reached the base of the flagship, scaling the walls with practiced ease. The Zorn were beginning to retaliate, but the resistance was faster, striking quickly and moving like shadows. Once inside, Alina's team split up, each moving to a designated target. Ryan and Daniels planted explosives in the strategic parts of the ship's core, while Alina and Vera headed for the command center. They moved swiftly, their every step calculated. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the heart of the Zorn operations. Inside, the Zorn command center was a stark, imposing room filled with alien technology. But there was no time to waste. Alina quickly set the final charges, watching the countdown flicker on her device. "Done," she said, breathing a sigh of relief. "Let's get out of here." The team rushed back to the extraction point, but the Zorn had already begun to realize what was happening. The alarms blared as they sprinted toward the exit, and just as they reached the outer walls of the flagship, an explosion tore through the ship. The shockwave sent them flying, and Alina felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. "We're not done yet," Ryan shouted, grabbing Alina's arm and pulling her to her feet. "Let's go." The team ran toward their escape route, the Zorn flagship now erupting in flames. The ground quaked with each explosion, and the final battle for Valoris had begun in earnest. As the team made their way back to the woods, Alina stole a glance at Vera, who had fought with everything she had. The Aurelians weren't just survivors, they were fighters. And this was their world, their fight. For Valoris, for the Aurelians, and for humanity. And this fight was far from over. The battle had escalated to an unforgiving intensity. The Zorn had thrown everything they had at the Aurelian resistance and the crew of the Eclipse, but the small force of humans and Aurelians were not backing down. Each attack had been met with a fierce counterattack, each retreat followed by a quick regroup and strike. But Alina knew the end was near. The Zorn were relentless, and they were bringing in more troops, more firepower, more of everything. The resistance was running out of time. The secondary base was holding, but barely. The perimeter had been breached multiple times, and Aurelian fighters were scattered, defending their homes with every ounce of strength they had left. The skies above were filled with the sound of warships, streaking across the heavens like fiery streaks of death. The Zorn were preparing for the final assault. "We've got one chance to end this," Alina said, her voice resolute, but tinged with the urgency of their situation. "We hit them where it hurts, their command center. If we take that out, we can cripple their operations." Ryan Ellis nodded, his face grim but determined. "It's a suicide mission, but it's the only shot we've got. We'll need to get close to their flagship. If we can get inside, we can plant the explosives and take down their entire command structure." Alina clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She had seen the Aurelians fight with a ferocity she never thought possible. But now, their bravery would be tested like never before. The Zorn were fierce and their technology far beyond what humanity could match. Yet Alina knew something the Zorn didn't: the unyielding spirit of the Aurelians and the will of humanity. The plan was simple: get to the Zorn flagship and plant the explosives in their command center. The Aurelians would provide a diversion, buying the team precious minutes. There was no room for failure. "We move in 2 hours," Alina said. "Everyone, get ready. This is it. We're fighting for more than our lives now. We're fighting for the future of Valoris, and for the Aurelian people." As the team prepared, Alina took a moment to survey the battlefield. The forest was alive with the sounds of combat. Gunfire, explosions, the screams of both Aurelians and Zorn. It was a far cry from the tranquil world Valoris had once been. Now, it was a planet at war, a place where survival meant more than just fighting for land. It was a fight for freedom, for survival, for justice. Vera approached Alina, her face determined, but there was a trace of doubt in her eyes. "Are we going to make it out of this?" she asked quietly. Alina looked at the young Aurelian, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But if we don't try, we'll lose everything. Valorous, your people, everything they've fought for will be gone. We do this, not just for us, but for every life that will come after." Vera nodded, swallowing her fear. "Then we fight, together." The 2-hour countdown passed in a blur. Alina's team was ready. Daniels, Harper, Ryan, and a few Aurelians had equipped themselves with the necessary gear: stealth suits, explosives, and energy weapons. They moved in silence, creeping through the underbrush as the massive Zorn ships loomed overhead. The Aurelians, now fully equipped and more than capable, moved with them, their eyes set on the task ahead. The team reached the clearing where the Zorn flagship loomed in the distance. It was massive, its dark hull gleaming under the harsh light of the distant stars. The base was heavily fortified, with automated sentry drones patrolling the perimeter. It was a fortress in space, a symbol of the Zorn's power. Ryan Ellis looked over at Alina, who gave him a small nod. "Let's do this," she said. The first wave of Aurelians launched their diversion, moving swiftly through the trees to create chaos near the perimeter. Explosions lit up the sky, and the Zorn troops scrambled, trying to reorient themselves. That was their cue. Alina, Ryan, Daniels, and the other human crew members sprinted forward, using the cover of the distraction to close the gap between them and the flagship. The Zorn were disoriented, but it wouldn't last long. They had only a few minutes before the enemy regrouped. They'd reached the base of the flagship, scaling the walls with practiced ease. The Zorn were beginning to retaliate, but the resistance was faster, striking quickly and moving like shadows. Once inside, Alina's team split up, each moving to a designated target. Ryan and Daniels planted explosives in the strategic parts of the ship's core, while Alina and Vera headed for the command center. They moved swiftly, their every step calculated. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the heart of the Zorn operations. Inside, the Zorn command center was a stark, imposing room filled with alien technology. But there was no time to waste. Alina quickly set the final charges, watching the countdown flicker on her device. "Done," she said, breathing a sigh of relief. "Let's get out of here." The team rushed back to the extraction point, but the Zorn had already begun to realize what was happening. The alarms blared as they sprinted toward the exit, and just as they reached the outer walls of the flagship, an explosion tore through the ship. The shockwave sent them flying, and Alina felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. "We're not done yet," Ryan shouted, grabbing Alina's arm and pulling her to her feet. "Let's go." The team ran toward their escape route, the Zorn flagship now erupting in flames. The ground quaked with each explosion, and the final battle for Valoris had begun in earnest. As the team made their way back to the woods, Alina stole a glance at Vera, who had fought with everything she had. The Aurelians weren't just survivors, they were fighters. And this was their world, their fight. For Valoris, for the Aurelians, and for humanity. And this fight was far from over.